Hello and welcome to today's Training Industry webinar, The Neuroscience of Consistency in Training, sponsored by the Training Associates. I'm Leah Johnson, Market Research Manager at Training Industry, and I'm so happy you could join us today. Before we get started, I'd like to quickly go over a few housekeeping items to help you interact with our speaker and get the most out of today's program. Throughout today's event, please feel free to submit questions in your Q&A panel, and we'll address them as possible toward the end of the program. We also encourage you to share the information you received today with your colleagues at Network via social media. Please include the hashtag TIWebinars and the Twitter handle @TTA Training so you're able to track your contribution to the conversation. When the program ends, you'll receive a short evaluation survey, and we greatly welcome your feedback about the content, speaker, or whatever you would like to share. As always, today's webinar will be recorded and archived on trainingindustry.com. You will be receiving a follow-up email from us that will include a link to the on-demand program for you to share with your team. Finally, should you have any technical troubles today, you can send me a message in your Q&A panel and reach out to Zoom tech support whose numbers are provided on your screen. If this is your first webinar with us, a special welcome goes out to you. At Training Industry, we offer dozens of webinars each year on subjects ranging from authenticity in the workplace to microlearning, innovation to change management, workforce development, and just about every topic relevant to leaders of training organizations around the globe. If you've attended one of our programs in the past, thank you so much for joining us again. Now to get started, I'd love to introduce you to today's speaker, Dr. Tom Whalen. Tom is the Director of Corporate Research at Training Industry, where he focuses on learning and development research that informs best practice recommendations for workplace training. Prior to joining Training Industry, he worked as an organizational consultant, designing and evaluating selection, training programs, compensation assessments, and data collection systems in a variety of industries, including technology, manufacturing, military special operations, and global pharmaceuticals. Dr. Whalen has published in leading journals and presented at international conferences on topics such as personality assessment, survey research methods, virtual workplaces, and training evaluation and effectiveness. He holds a PhD in industrial organizational psychology from North Carolina State University. Today, Tom will discuss the principles of neuroscience, how the principles of neuroscience can help improve your training consistency in order to impact enterprise training strategy, increase learner motivation, and boost training effectiveness. But before we get started, I'd like to pass things over to Lynn Wagner, the Senior Director of Marketing Programs at the Training Associates.
Thanks, Leah. Hey, everyone. Welcome again. It's great to see so many people here today. While at last count, I think we actually had over 1,000 people registered for today's webinar, which is awesome. So let's talk about consistency in training. It's not something on the top of people's minds always when they're developing their company's learning programs. But it is a topic that has been identified as one of the biggest challenges companies say they face in delivering an effective learning portfolio. So with that challenge in mind, the Training Associates partnered with our friends over at Training Industry to understand the impact that training consistency has on learners. Does consistency even matter to learners? Do they even notice a lack of training consistency? Or conversely, do they notice if your company is great at providing consistency in the trainings they participate in? And really, most importantly, why should it matter to companies one way or another? Well, I'm not going to give away any spoilers right now, but as a thank you for registering for today's webinar, we will be sending you an email with a link to our new white paper, Consistency of Training in the Learning Experience. So please keep an eye out for that in the next couple of days. So now I just wanted to give a quick introduction for those of you who don't know who we are. The Training Associates is a leading provider of contract learning and development talent and solutions, and we help clients meet their training and development goals by providing expert L&D talent and services for everything from learning strategy to instructional design and development, as well as training delivery in all modalities. So I want to thank you for indulging me in that little introduction, and now I'm going to hand the reins over to Tom.
Well, good morning or good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're coming to us from in the world. As Lynn said, the foundation for what we're going to talk about today came out of a research project we did looking at the consistency of training and how learners perceive the consistency of training. One thing that we like to do in a lot of the research that we do here is try to get the perspective of those people taking training. So basically the end users of corporate training, and try to uncover and explore and better understand how they approach the training that they have to take, how they feel about it, what they think can be improved, where they think the deficits are. And so this research largely came out of wanting to know more about the questions surrounding training consistency and how people feel about it and how they view it. So now that's what the report is about. Today specifically, we're going to be talking about some of those research results, but the bulk of what we're going to be discussing is how neuroscience applies to the process of learning, how memory works, how people acquire knowledge, and how we can apply that to corporate training to help it be more consistent and help learners just be able to simply learn better. So on the screen, you'll see an agenda. So this is going to be an action adventure in 4 parts. First, we're going to talk about training consistency, kind of what it is, and what the responses were to the research that we did earlier this year, and how learners responded to our questions about consistency. After that, we're going to talk about the neuroscience of learning. After that, we will talk about how the neuroscience of learning applies to training consistency, and we'll have some suggestions that people can integrate into their companies, how training is structured, how it's rolled out, basically as much as we can in the space of time that we have today, and we'll leave some time at the end for questions. Okay, so Act 1. Is L&D delivering a consistent experience to learners? That was kind of the question that we started with this research overall. And so what we found when we asked people is the answer is not really. So the question that prompted the ratings that you're seeing on the screen was trying to capture learners' opinion of the overall consistency of the learning experience at their company. So in other words, how frequently does training appear to be high quality from the learner perspective? And as you can see, the responses came back divided roughly in thirds. 38% said the company was, or the company's training was always or almost always consistent. 30% said it was usually consistent. And 32% said it was sometimes or not at all consistent. And the genesis of wanting to go after this topic specifically was that in several research projects that we've been conducting here at Training Industry, every time we ask about the different challenges that learning leaders face when they're trying to deploy training to an employee population, one of the top 3 challenges always comes back as improving consistency. Again and again, just having the learning experience be consistent, having the way that employees interact with a training system is being consistent, and that seems to be one of the things that a lot of companies are grappling with. Now, the other challenges that tend to come up are ones that we would all expect. They're either economic in nature, so they have to do with limited resources, whether it be, they don't have enough time, or they don't have enough staff, or, the holy grail, they don't have enough budget. And one of the other challenges is all kind of back-end things that learners won't see anyway. So how do you evaluate training? How do you tell whether or not it's effective? How do you know whether you're getting good ROI? But the one that touches learners the most is this idea of consistency. So again, to answer the question, is L&D delivering a consistent experience to learners? The answer seems to be not really. Now, there are different gradations and flavors, if you will, of consistency besides this kind of overall global rating of it. But before we get into those results, we wanted to ask, what do you, the people on this webinar, think people usually mean when you hear the word consistency talked about in the context of training? Do you think people usually mean that everything is consistent, kind of from top to bottom? Is maybe what's top of mind that the delivery of training is consistent? Is it the structure of content that's consistent? Is it the way that training is accessed that's consistent? Or are you not sure and you're pretty sure most people don't know either. And with that, I guess I'll pause for a second and give people a chance to respond to the poll question on the screen.
Thanks, Tom. If you guys haven't already done so, please take a moment and select your response on your screen. I'll give you guys just a few more seconds to do so. Looking like we've got a clear winner, Tom. All right, I'm going to close the poll and here are your results.
Okay, so it seems to be well, not necessarily a tie. The winner seems to be not sure, and most people probably aren't sure either. Now, some, about a quarter of you said it probably means everything, and roughly a fifth said it's delivery or it's the structure of content. So going into this, I was pretty sure that the answer, when we asked people, was either going to be everything or no idea. And so going into this research, we wanted to tease out the differences between these two things. So the data that we just looked at kind of approached this question from the answer to A of everything being consistent. Just in general, when you ask an employee, is the training consistent? What are they going to say? But when you try to scratch under the surface and get more into, well, what do they mean? The structure that we came up with to try to frame this centered around four content areas. So the first was content design. So this is related to the creation and management of all the instructional material. So this includes all the courses, the different curriculum that employees would go through, workshops that they're attending, seminars, webinars like this, or other types of programs that they may attend. So it's kind of the what. When an employee is engaging with the training, it's the what's in it, how's it all set up. There's also the delivery of that content. So any of the methods associated with the transfer of information, are those consistent? Third, there was the learning technology. So these are all the technologies inherent to managing and delivering training. So it's a little bit different than delivery. So it's not necessarily what's transferring you the information. It's kind of the larger technological framework that all the training may be couched in. And then lastly, kind of the black sheep of these four categories, training administration. So this is all the processes associated with managing the logistics and the day-to-day operations of a training function. So we gave learners a series of questions that kind of touched upon all of these four areas, to try to find out and to tease apart the differences between these areas of consistency. And I'll foreshadow a little bit. The research found that all four of these areas are related to other ratings that we asked for, like training effectiveness. So the more consistent an employee perceives their training to be, the more effective they also perceive the training to be. And we're gonna talk much more about that later. But first, these are of all the questions that we asked when we put them in their categories. These are the averages that came out for each category. So the scale that you see on the left represents kind of the effectiveness of whether or not the company is consistent or not. And each data point there is kind of the average across everything on a 5-point scale for where did all the ratings fall. So as you can see, content delivery and administration kind of even Steven. Technology takes a bit of a hit there. But what was notable to me is the value of all these numbers. I mean, they're hovering kind of on the low end between, it's usually consistent and it's almost always consistent. Now, the big question that we asked is this good news? Being a little bit better than usually consistent with training, is that something to aspire to for any organization trying to deliver training across their entire enterprise? So that kind of prompted today's webinar, trying to explore, well, how can L&D be more consistent, and what are some of the things that are beneath the surface on why employees feel this way, what might explain some of these results, and what shapes people's perceptions of consistency. So with that, we'll move on to Act 2 in this action adventure and ask the question, well, what does consistency in training have to do with the brain? So first and foremost, the way that people are just universally, no matter where you are in the globe, our brains are designed for pattern recognition and sense making. This, as we walk about the world, interacting with different things, interacting with different people, we're seeking out patterns. We're striving to make sense of what's around us. But the catch to all this is a lot of the inputs to our brain are fallible. They have some bottlenecks and limits to them, and they're subject to constant change. So, for example, if you look at the screen, you know, I just made it shift from gray to this kind of greenish purple, and if you blink your eyes and you know, kind of look around the screen, it should look like everything's moving. Now, it's not. This isn't a video that we've thrown in the middle of this. What you're looking at is a static image. And this is what's called a peripheral drift illusion. So what's going on is wherever you are looking, you know, you might notice kind of where your eyes are focused, things look still, but all around it, it seems like there's some motion. For me, it looks like everything's rotating to the right. Now, I should qualify this and say there's 5% of you out there that may not see anything. And as best as researchers can tell, we don't know why that is. But for the 95% of you that are seeing this appear to move, what's going on is there's an interaction between your ability to detect motion and your eye's ability to deal with contrast. And so when this picture was gray, it reduced all the contrast, and you didn't get this effect where it looks like it's moving. And as you'll see when I shift it back to gray, doesn't look like it's moving anymore. Now, I'm obviously not just trying to be fancy and show you something that looks cool. The point here is the inputs to our brain are fallible. You know, there are a lot of different ways that we take in information, and none of them are perfect. And all of those inputs change over time. And you know, because we're dealing with these imperfect inputs, we're always kind of putting our expectations onto things. That's part of the whole pattern recognition and sense making aspect of this. We want to see things, and we just default to seeing things as a whole rather than the sum of you know, constituent parts. So our expectations about what we're looking at drive a lot of what we do. Now, the fact that our brain is subject to constant change kind of also leads our brain to itself change continuously. So as you'll see on the screen, our brains grow. I mean, obviously when we're little, they grow as we get older, but that growth and that change and that adaptation never really stops. So the key word to how the brain works is that it's dynamic. It adapts fairly quickly and efficiently. You know, there can be slight changes in the anatomical structure of the brain, how networks of neurons are connecting with each other. You know, where and how we're generating new neurons through a process called neurogenesis, and also how the neurotransmitters and the chemicals in our brain work. Now, one aspect with this, or kind of what rules the way these changes work, was first stated by a researcher named Donald Hebb in 1949, and his axiom is that cells that fire together wire together. If anybody's had exposure to neuroscience in the past, this is kind of one of those. You know, this is an introductory chapter sort of statement here on the fact that the brain can change. Now, what's interesting is we can't always observe how these changes are occurring I mean, in some instances, we know that, okay, this area of the brain is growing, this area of the brain is shrinking, but a lot of the different connections that are there, um, are kind of once they're set in place, they're there. So yes, the brain changes and adapts, but it doesn't have a huge capacity to do so. And as we get into adulthood, it becomes a lot more difficult to alter the circuits that are inside our head and learn complex behaviors. It's not impossible. It just might take a little bit longer. Now that said, this is not something that we can do solely through force of will. So just because we desire to be an inspirational leader doesn't mean our brain is going to fall in line and do what we want it to. It's very much kind of a use it or lose it type of thing. Whatever we direct our efforts towards over time, that's the way that our brain will go. Now, to talk about some of the limits of neuroplasticity, I wanted to very quickly go over the story of Les Baugh, who you'll see on the screen here. This is him at the Johns Hopkins Advanced Physics Laboratory in 2014. So Mr. Baugh is from Colorado. He had both of his arms amputated at the shoulder following an electrical accident 40 years earlier from what you're seeing on the screen. So John Hopkins does a lot of work with robotic prosthetics. And what they did is basically reroute the nerves that kind of go from his brain and would otherwise go to his arms into his chest, and fitted him with this prosthetic. Now, the amazing part of this is what's going on is he's just thinking, I want to move my hand and close my fingers together exactly in the same way that you or I, or assuming that we all have hands, the way that you or I would do this. So what's the message here? What's the limit of neuroplasticity? We're all pretty much wired the same, so how plastic is plastic? To kind of get into that a little bit, Mr. Baugh wasn't missing the brain areas or the neurons to move his arms and hands. He didn't have to relearn how to do those motions or retrain his brain how to do this. The guy you see in the background is actually trying to fine tune the prosthetics themselves to learn from him. So he wasn't missing these brain areas. He was just missing the arms and hands. And so when they were able surgically to kind of give that back to him, all he has to do is think, I want to move my hand, and his hand moves. Now, within the brain, there are several major areas that control a lot of different things. There's the frontal lobe. This is where most of our complex thought goes on, abstract ideas, all that sort of thing. There's the parietal lobe. This is responsible for our sensory inputs and for our action planning. If you want to pick up your foot, wave your hand, it starts in that lobe of the brain. There's the cerebellum, which is kind of this giant switchboard in the brain that actually contains half of all the neurons that are in your brain. It's very wrinkly. If you unfold it, it's about 20 by 20 inches, so it's kind of the size of a large couch pillow if it were unfolded. But that regulates a lot of what we do. There's the occipital lobe, which is responsible for our vision and spatial, kind of telling where things are in space and around us. But most importantly to what we're talking about, there's the temporal lobe. There are areas of this lobe of the brain that regulate our emotion. But most importantly, this is the area of the brain that has a lot to do with how we learn and what we learn. One of the most important structures in the brain here, or in the temporal lobe of the brain, is the hippocampus. It's named the hippocampus. The word is kind of stuck together from two ancient Greek words that literally mean horse and sea monster. And the reason it's named this, and there's a seahorse on the screen, is because when they first surgically took it out of the brain, it looks eerily like a seahorse. Now, why is this? Not that aside, that's just kind of a fun fact. But that aside, what's important about the hippocampus, or why do we need to know about the hippocampus? Well, part of what the hippocampus does is it's part of the system that manages our stress response. So we get a rush of adrenaline, all those kinds of things. The hippocampus is part of the system that's regulating all of that. The hippocampus is also critical to acquiring knowledge. So it's in this area of the temporal lobe that's sort of it's referred to as the hub of hubs for integrating learning and helping us be able to remember things and retrieve those memories. Now, why this is important and what this has to do with consistency, just in case it seemed like I was getting off track, is that when things are inconsistent, when you are stressing learners out, or there's something about the learning experience that's stressful, research has shown that when somebody is under stress, the actual they're called dendrites. They're kind of the inputs to the individual neurons in our brain. The dendrites of the brain cells in the hippocampus retract when we're under stress. So that reduces the number of synapses, that reduces essentially our ability to be able to learn, not because we're not paying attention, or not because we're thinking about what kind of sandwich we might have for lunch that day. It's simply because of stress. It's sort of a protective mechanism. Now, the hippocampus has lots to do with memory, as I said, but there are also some interesting things about memory that have a lot to do with why we would want to make sure that we're not stressing employees out when they're trying to learn. And one of those things, and something that's kind of poorly understood generally about memory, is that memory is not this single process or this single system. It's really a network or a family of systems that allow us to store and integrate and recall all different sorts of information. Um, so the way that memory works is very different from the computer that you may be sitting in front of. So there's no hard disk that saves all the data, and then there's RAM that kind of powers the computer, and those are separate things. Where if one broke, you just replace it, and your computer runs again. In the brain, all that stuff happens in the same place. So as for what we know about the way memory works in neuroscience, where we experience things, so the areas of the brain, all the different sensory inputs, what is going on in our head when we're experiencing things, those same places light up when we remember things. Now, to go a little bit more into memory, we usually think of memory as storing just facts and skills, and certainly kind of in the training domain, we make a distinction between there's knowledge, there's skills, and then there's abilities. But the way our memory works is actually a lot richer than that. And there's several different types of memory, and they all feed off of each other. They can be triggered by different things, and they all have inputs that can come from a lot of different directions. So the kind of main type of memory we think about is what we call explicit memory. And the first type of explicit memory is semantic memory. And so the books on the screen, that's kind of what we commonly sort of think of. We know stuff, we know words, we know numbers, we know facts about things. We have abstract ideas. It's all semantics. It's all just things. Now, why it's called explicit is because we can bring these to mind, we can explain them, we can talk about them. We usually have to have some sort of language to represent them in the first place. There's also a type of explicit memory, though, called episodic memory. Obviously, it just means an episode of something. Now, this is memory for things that happened. So, so it could be, a memory of dancing with somebody, like in the picture. It could be a memory of something that happened when you were a kid. Could be a memory of something that happened last week. But the type of memory that we're talking about is the memory for things that have occurred. Again, it's explicit because we can describe it, we can explain it. It's something that we can bring to mind. There's also this type of memory called implicit memory. which is largely involved with the procedure for how we do things. So things like riding a bike. How do you ride a bike? Uh, you have to learn it, but it's sort of hard to explain to somebody else. It's something you have to experience. It's a procedure that you learn how to do. Same thing with driving a car. Um, a good example might be, those of you that have cars that have push button starts. uh, how long did it take you to adapt to when you got in the car? You're just used to the procedure of stick the key into the steering column and turn it and start the car. Now you have to adapt to a button. Same sort of thing with driving a car, with getting maybe from work to home. uh, you can drive and be talking on the phone, listening to something on the radio, and not really remember how you got from the office to home. But you're going to get there, and you're going to get there safely. You've driven so much. The procedure of doing that is ingrained in your memory, and you don't really need to attend to it all that much. Now, there's also this type of implicit memory called priming. And what priming is it's not necessarily something that we consciously do or have to control, but it's how different ideas get associated in our brain, and it helps us bring things to mind a lot easier. So, for example, if I give you the color red, you might think of a red rose. From that, you might just think generically, oh, red flowers. What else comes on plants? Berries, that are still red. There are some types of berries, they create red wine. From that, you might think of the UB40 song Red, Red Wine, which, another fun fact, is actually a Neil Diamond song. Again, another example, give you the color red. Maybe think of a red pepper. What else is red and spicy? Maybe you think of Red Hot's candy. What else is red and hot? Maybe you think of a fire truck. So now you're thinking red vehicles. You think of a red Corvette. Maybe from Red Corvette, you get to Little Red Corvette by Prince. So now if I give you the color blue, not everybody, but what's likely going through your mind now? I mean, I've given you two prompts, that have ended with a song. So the association of ideas in your head make it easier to name things that have to do with music from this color. So maybe you think of song titles with the word blue. Maybe you think of albums that have blue in the title. So the key word here is association. Now the other question is, with these types of associations, is can we get any better at making these kind of things? Or if through exercising these sort of things, is this a skill that we can develop? So that leads us to our next poll question. Do you think you can train your brain to be stronger in the same way that physical exercise makes the body stronger? So the answers are, yeah, that sounds right. Kind of, you can kind of train your brain, but it's shaky at best. Maybe, or nope, that's not something that happens.
Hi, everyone. If you haven't already done so, please take a moment to select your response on your screen. All right, Tom, I'm going to close the poll, and here are your results.
Cool. All right, so this is what I expected to see. Is that most people say, yep, that sounds right. That yeah, you can train your brain to be stronger. And the actual answer is kind of, but it's shaky at best. There's a lot of evidence that so-called brain training interventions will absolutely improve performance on whatever the task is that you've put a lot of work into. Sometimes it'll improve performance on closely related tasks, and it doesn't. There's very little evidence that it can enhance performance on stuff that's barely related or just generally improve your everyday cognitive performance. So there's been a lot of research that has shown that people that have superior memory for things like chess or sports, that ability is usually confined to whatever that domain is that they're an expert in. Just because you're an expert at chemistry doesn't mean you're able to boil water correctly. So to the to the question, can we get better at training our brain? It really depends on the type of information and the type of memory that we're dealing with. Get this to go forward. So uh, there's a way that we learn things, and that's kind of why the way that memory gets reinforced can not necessarily bleed over into other areas. So first, every time we engage in a task, if we experience success, we get a sense of achievement. That positive feedback leads to a dopamine release in our brain. From that dopamine release, we get a desire to do it again. We feel good about it. I mean, our expectations are there that it's going to be positive. That continued activity connects our neurons together and strengthens some of those circuits through a process that literally insulates the synapses and makes it easier for the brain cells to talk to each other. From there, sorry, I precluded myself. The myelination of circuits is what I just described. Makes it more efficient for the brain cells to talk to each other, and it makes us better at whatever the task is. From there, that competence leads to a feeling of success and a desire to engage in the task again. So the takeaway here is there's an interplay and a positive feedback loop between the biology of the brain and how we think and we feel about things. It's nearly impossible to separate those two from each other. So in corporate training, in any task, any learning activity that you have learners doing, this is the cycle that you want people to be going through. I mean, it's not all about just having circuits fire off in your brain and oop, now you can remember something. There has to be a positive association with it. Now, the problem that we run into very often is we only have the ability to pay attention to so much. There's a lot of stuff in the popular press about our ability to multitask, and the issue with this is multitasking makes it a lot more likely that we're going to make an error, and it makes it a lot harder for us to catch and correctly identify an error. And the reason that this is every time we're doing a task, if it's tapping the same resources, we're only able to attend to those resources so much. It's a different it's a difference between what's called serial and parallel processing. We think we can do things in parallel, but the reality is, we have a bottleneck with how much effort we can put into something. So in reality, we're doing things one after the other. We're just trying to keep this limited resource pool that we have engaged, but we can only engage one thing at a time, despite what some of us may think. And so what this all amounts to is what's called cognitive load, and this has a lot to do with working memory. And working memory is the very temporary sort of short-term memory we have. Say if you're trying to remember a phone number, or you're trying to remember something between, like, you read it, I need to type it into uh, a web address, or make a note of something, between reading it and typing it down. You're not trying to hold it in long-term memory. You just need it for right now. Now, the issue is that not every type of information is processed the same way by the brain. So how much we're able to hear that's sound, how much we're able to remember that's visual, those two things are working through separate circuits, but they all have limitations on them. Now, as you'll see on the screen, our processing of information changes with expertise and experience. So the more we're familiar with something, the more we build what's called a schema around it, which is more or less just sort of a framework, an understanding of how something fits together that allows us to hold that as one big chunk. And so when we have that chunk, then we can work on more complex problems because we're able to add other chunks to it at the same time. So what this chunking does, or what expertise effectively does, is it gives us more capacity to problem solve. If we didn't have that ability, we would not be able to attack and tackle and successfully resolve big, large, complex, and difficult problems. Now, how do we know any of this? Initially, when psychology first started off, we thought that function had to be paired with a location, so some specific area of the brain. And what you're looking at on the screen is a admittedly hilarious map for something that used to be called phrenology. So this was the quote unquote science of, I can tell what your personality is like by the bumps on your head. Those bumps were thought to reflect different strengths or weaknesses in different areas of the brain, and that's what determined psychology. Now, this idea that location is always paired with a function is true in general for some things, and we know that by observing what happens to people and what happens to their behavior after they suffer some sort of damage to the brain. But increasingly, neuroscientists find that it's a bad assumption to make that function and location kind of are always paired together in the brain. So just like memory, there's no one place where knowledge goes. There's no single place that kind of regulates and rules all this. It's distributed all over the place. And how do we know that? If you've ever had the pleasure of being in this big magnetic bagel-looking thing called an MRI, that's how we know. With the advent of this technology, we've been able to look at how the brain functions and the different ways that it functions, and be able to see kind of what's going on in the brain. And the way it works is actually pretty fascinating. So, as most people know, the human body is mostly made of water. So what an MRI does is it actually it puts those water molecules through a magnetic field with one magnet, and then switches another magnet on and off really quick, and looks at how it's aligning the water molecules. I mean, it doesn't hurt. It's painless. There's no radiation involved with it. The scariest thing about it is you got to be on a sled-looking thing and slide into this giant donut. But it makes a loud knocking sound when you're in it. That's kind of the scariest thing about it. But the scanner can detect from this magnetism the structure and function of the brain. So there's a couple different ways to read it. There's a MRI, which is just sort of traditionally what we think of. This is just looking at structure of the water molecules. There's also something called a functional MRI, which looks at the water molecules in blood and looks at the blood flow, which allows us to say where is blood going to different areas of the brain, where is the brain active. And there's also kind of the newest iteration of this called diffusion tensor imaging, which you have a picture of on the right. Besides being very colorful, what this actually shows us is the speed and the direction of water diffusion across the brain. So this is actually kind of getting at where the highways are, what direction the highways are going. So from the combination of all these different types of brain scans, we're able to know things like, okay, when you learn how a song starts, when you learn, what a particular flower looks like, there's not, one location in your brain that's registering all that and encoding a memory and kind of setting that into stone. It's a combination of all sorts of things, using various lobes within your brain. And a whole lot of connections on both the right and left hemispheres. So it's actually, the way that memory in the brain works is kind of what you see on the right. It's this unimaginably complex amount of circuitry. It's composed of upwards of 170 billion different types of brain cells. I'm sorry, not different types. 170 billion brain cells. That is what allows us to interact with the world, to learn, and to do all these things. Now, to get into the third act of this, so you might be thinking, yeah, that's all that was interesting, Tom, but how do I use any of this knowledge to foster greater consistency in my training? So in other words, why buy into anything that I've been saying? So first and foremost, I'd challenge you with the question, well, what is it that your learners are learning? Are they really acquiring new knowledge and skills? Or are they learning, how to navigate some new LMS architecture? Are they learning how, um, how to install a software they need to access some sort of learning portal? Are they learning how to search for a conference room in an area of a building that they've never been in before? Are they learning new ways to work around having to take required training? Are they figuring out how to skip to the quiz at the end of an e-learning module? So every time that there's inconsistency or confusion on the part of the learner, or what they have to attend to has nothing to do with the topic or the content at hand, you're reducing learning, or you're diverting their attention, and you're diverting the mental resources that they have away from the actual training content. So, some suggestions to foster greater consistency in your training. First and foremost, try to use common elements and language across all training content to tie concepts together. There's a reason that we use repetition in things. Is because the more times we encounter something, the deeper the encoding in our memory, and the the better and the deeper the learning of some sort of content, the easier it is to retrieve, and the easier it is to retrieve for a longer amount of time after the initial learning. Another suggestion is to set up common navigation for access to any training offering. If somebody has to go here to access e-learning, but then they have to go somewhere different, if it's virtual classroom, they're the bulk of their attention ends up being spent in just how do I get to where I need to go, rather than let me get there quick and easy and devote all my resources to what's being taught. Another suggestion is to deploy a common presentation structure regardless of the modality. Now, this obviously won't work everywhere. You can't structure a classroom the exact same way as you're going to structure a microlearning. They're they're apples and oranges, but they're still both fruit. So as much as you can hold common between those two modalities, in terms of how the content is put together, the more seamless and the more the expectations of the learner don't have to change drastically from one modality to another. Another suggestion is to make L&D changes look gradual, to keep any transitions that you're asking learners to make as smooth as possible. So you can change the kind of the administration and all the back end of your corporate training system. So how learners need to register for things, and kind of where that goes and how that data is handled. But on the user interface side, on the learner experience side, if those changes are smooth, or they just seem slight, if there's only one or two gotchas they need to pay attention to, rather than having to totally relearn how something works, the more consistent their experience is, training session to training session. Another thing to do is provide the same type of feedback and rewards as much as possible. So capitalize on that dopamine feedback cycle, and reward people. Stamp in those memories by basically giving people a cookie, via neurotransmitters, um, and offer that to them consistently and always. And then lastly, kind of going back to the stuff about working memory and schemas and expertise. Anytime you need to have introductory sections, give the learner some choice in how they go through things. So if it's sections that would be review, and it's not review in the sense of the first suggestion of trying to use the same language all the time. If you have experienced learners that don't need to review those kind of things, give them the ability to skip it. So that way they are putting all their resources into, okay, what's new? What do I need to pick up from this? What haven't I encountered before? And how does this, if I already know all the introductory stuff, I have that knowledge. Tell me what's new. Tell me what I need to fit into what I already know. Now, on the flip side of that coin, Don't make repeated changes to your training on a whim just to keep up with the newest trends in the market. You know, every time something new comes out, you know, and there's you know, it's kind of popular press around, you know, like, this is going to increase your learning by 30%. It might eventually, but it's not going to do that immediately. So with a lot of things, you have to give them some time, or you have to slowly integrate you know, different technologies and things like that, so that learners have time to get used to them, so that they're not always having these new things being thrown at them, or these new experiences being thrown at them. And so they're just trying to get their bearings when they're in training, rather than actually learning what the content is. Another suggestion is don't drastically overhaul your entire L&D enterprise and expect positive results, as I just suggested. You know, I mean, when you put people through change, you're basically throwing stress at them, and so you're not going to get, you know, applause and great ROI and great learning outcomes, you know, as soon as people have to grapple with something that's new. You know, if you do have to uh, go through a drastic overhaul or something like that, you should expect that the results are not going to be positive right away. You have to give it some time. You have to give the learners some time for whatever this new, you know, new flavor is, that they have to be able to get used to it. That has to become their new consistency in order for them to learn the best that they can. Also, don't assume all learners are at the same level of proficiency with learning technology. There's a lot of tools that are out there that are, you know, are all meant to help learners. You know, there's a lot of kind of cool whiz bang stuff that's out there that that you know, for some advanced learners, or for learners that are maybe very comfortable with technology, you know, they're going to greet with open arms and embrace immediately. But if you have learners that aren't quite as adept at navigating technology, um, you know, same kind of thing's going to happen. It's going to stress them out, and you know, a large portion of your content and the time that you have them spending attending to that content might just simply be wasted. They might have to return to it again and again because they're learning the technology at the same time that they're trying to learn the content. And then lastly, you know, don't interpret consistency to mean just sticking to one modality, or just one training topic. And we're gonna get into that in a second. So kind of the overall why care about any of this. You know, those last few slides may seem like helpful suggestions, but there are very solid reasons to care about this. So in our research, we found that consistency in all four of these areas, in the content design, in the delivery of training, in the technology used to administer that training, and the handling the logistics, they were all significantly correlated with learners' levels of motivation for training. And so the more those things were consistent, the more motivated learners were. Uh, these things were also all positively related to the perceptions of opportunities for professional development. You know, so training was seen as a benefit to them. It was seen as something helping them get a step up, you know, helping them advance in their knowledge and their expertise. As I alluded to at the beginning of the webinar, every single one of these areas of consistency was related to the overall effectiveness of training, from the learner's perception. And they were all significantly related to the job satisfaction of all the learners. You know, so essentially, the more consistent your training is, the more engaged your employees tend to be. Now, interestingly, the consistency across all four of these areas was not related at all to the number of modalities a learner has to use for training, nor was it related to the range of different topics a learner has had to engage with for training. You know, so consistency, you know, again, doesn't have to mean, you know, just a few modalities. We know from other research that a lot of companies are using, you know, upwards of 5, 6 on average modalities to deliver training across the entire enterprise. Everybody has to take a variety of training topics, but that doesn't mean that the presentation and the structure and the way all those things are delivered can't be consistent. So the key concepts here to take away, are what are learners expecting? If their expectations are being met consistently by your training, the quality of learning ultimately ends up being higher. And with that, I'm going to take a breath and a drink of water and see if there's any questions.
While Tom catches his breath, if you guys haven't already done so, please submit any questions you may have using the Q&A panel located in the top left-hand corner of your screen. I'd like to kick things off. We have a couple people asking about the sample size. I know we've got a sample size of 283. Are these individuals from different companies? What's their representation?
That's a great question. So the research report will actually go into detail about the makeup of all the companies that participated in this. But yes, the participants in this research came from companies of all sizes, from across a bunch of different types of industries, and a bunch of different job roles. So this wasn't research that we went into one oil and gas company and asked a whole bunch of people just in that industry, or that tend to deal with a particular type of learning all the time. This came from all over the place. So to us, and this is what we usually try to do as well. We wanted to capture kind of the greatest range of learning experiences, so that when we tried to summarize it like this, we could make sure that the results are as representative of just kind of learning in general as they could be.
Great, thanks, Tom. Our next question is from Melody. She wants to know, are organizations using priming during training?
My opinion is some of them probably are, either wittingly or unwittingly. I mean, the way that a lot of our education works, just kind of in general in school, has a lot to do with priming. And the way priming works, or the objective of trying to use priming, is just relating things to things that people already know about. So the more that you can familiarize people with some of the concepts, then the jump from, okay, I know what all those parts are, so how is it you're saying they fit together, or what's this new piece to add to it? I mean, it's making the process of dealing with the information and working memory that much easier. So I think it happens. How intentional is it? Not not entirely sure, to be honest. But I mean, it is happening.
Great, thanks, Tom. Our next question is from Giovanna. She wants to know if there are any books you would recommend on these types of topics.
Ooh, that's a very good question. Off the top of my head, I do not know, or I'm not immediately aware of any book that tries to tie these things together. I know there's a lot of information out there about neuroscience and training, but right off the top of my head, I don't have any recommendations that I could point to and and confidently say, yes, you can believe what these people are saying over here.
I've got a question from Leah. She wants to know, can you give examples of how to keep training consistent across different modalities?
Sure. So when we're looking at different modalities, there's the or I guess there's a lot of attention paid to trying to match a modality with different types of content. And the way that I that at least I would approach that kind of thing is what you have to consider is what's the level of detail in that content. How is it how are you structuring that content? Can you break it down into constituent parts? So is it a micro learning that maybe needs to be rolled out across 6 installments? And at the same time, can you take all of those 6 micro learning installments and put them into some sort of presentation that an instructor could give in a classroom on site? So it's to me, it's really about trying to look at the amount of content in a training program, and looking at the level of detail, and trying to say what chunks make sense to put together, and how do you structure those things so that almost no matter where you're encountering it in the same order, in the same way, and roughly at the same level of detail.
Great. Thank you so much, Tom. Unfortunately, we are all out of time. If we didn't get to your questions, I sincerely apologize. I've just got a few closing notes for you guys. We'd love for you to attend some of our upcoming training industry webinars. You can register for these programs and watch past webinars at trainingindustry.com. And all training industry webinars are pre-qualified for a credit hour by ISPI and CPTM. What is CPTM? It is a certified professional in training management program that assists you in developing core competencies that will empower you to manage the future training needs of your organization. You can participate in a number of programs held within the U.S. or join us for a virtual practicum from anywhere in the world. For more information, you can visit trainingindustry.com/training. And of course, we'd love for you to join us in person for our next Training Industry Conference and Expo happening in Raleigh, North Carolina in June 2018. And on behalf of Training Industry, I'd love to thank our speaker today, Dr. Tom Whalen, and our sponsor, the Training Associates, and all of you for your time and attention today. As a reminder, today's webinar is being recorded, and you'll receive a link to the on-demand recording after the event. On behalf of Training Industry, I'm Leah Johnson. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.